The June Rebellion was an unsuccessful anti-monarchist insurrection in Paris. But what caused this rebellion in the first place? Why were the French people always so displeased? Why were there so many rebellions and revolutions in the time period? Can everyone just stop being so angry? Apparently, they couldn't. Looking back just a little, 1827 to 1832, the years leading up to the uprisings were characterized by harvest failures, food shortages, and increases in the cost of living, creating discontent throughout the classes. There was a cholera outbreak and people were dying left and right about 2 days after showing symptoms. Where there is sickness, there is anger, am I right? But what was behind the onset of all these drastically poor living conditions? For one, France's leadership has been inconsistent since 1789. In 1830, France had a king named Charles X who was a believer in the divine right to rule. The Liberals were especially angry at him when they won the elections for the Chamber of Deputies fairly, and Charles just kicked them out and took away their rights with the Four Ordinances. The Four Ordinances, naturally, had a political impact in that it dissolved the recently elected Chamber of Deputies and called for new elections. However, it also immensely affected the social and economic conditions at the time by actively limiting the franchise to the wealthiest people in the country and restricting freedom of the press. The enraged Liberals reacted by calling the nation to reject the monarch's actions while the workers of Paris built barricades in the streets. Although more than 1,800 people were killed, the army was not able to take back control of Paris, and Charles X abdicated. This event was called the July Revolution of 1830.
After the July Revolution, Louis Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, was proclaimed as the new king. Many things changed in France during his regime. The new constitution was regarded as the right of the people rather than the concession of the monarch. The king had to cooperate with the Chamber of Deputies so he could no longer make laws on his own authority. The new government was anti-clerical and censorship was abolished. Although all these changes were put into place for the good of France, the government had little sympathy for the lower and working classes. During the July Revolution, the workers had called for the protection of jobs and better wages. However, none of their demands were met and the workers continued to live in poor social conditions. And now, here's the fun part where this all relates to the famous book, musical, and movie Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Who knows, maybe there was even some desperate love story somewhere in there. General Lamarck was a leading critic of the constitutional monarchy of Louis Philippe and was a supporter of liberal causes. When Lamarck contracted cholera, it was his death that sparked the June Rebellion. The goal was to reverse the establishment of the 1830 July monarchy of Louis Philippe. The Republicans made the first move at General Lamarck's funeral where shots were exchanged between the government and the students leading the rebellion. Soon, barricades were created in the streets of Paris with students seeking cover behind them from the approaching army.
A leader of one such barricade was Charles Jean, who in a letter to his sister effectively conveyed his perspective of the revolutionary movement. Ever since I reached the age of reason, my one passion, the dream of every moment, was the liberty of my homeland, political equality for all citizens, the abolition of privileges and monopolies. In a word, the fulfillment of all the hopes of happiness and well-being which the immortal efforts of our fathers gave birth to when they smashed the degrading yoke of despotism under which their ancestors' heads had been bowed for so many centuries. And so, when on the 26th of July, 1830, a Bourbon dared to violate the charter, my heart responded with a cry of joy, to the cry of sorrow and indignation which all of France gave forth. I saw the birth of the dawn of liberty. Unfortunately, despite the revolutionary fervor of those involved, the rebellion ended almost as quickly as it had started. For this reason, the June insurrections of 1832 are often viewed as being ultimately insignificant. Yet, with this insignificance comes the implication that social and economic conditions in France likewise did not see any significant change. This is further emphasized in John Stuart Mill's coverage of the June insurrections, in which he acknowledges the unsatisfactory living conditions in France as justification for the attempted rebellion. Of the two parties who are guilty of the present and of the impending mischief, incomparably the most guilty is the government. That small part of the people of Paris who planned or who joined the insurrection are not without considerable excuse. To compare them with our own people under recent circumstances would be to judge them unfairly. If we English could neither have formed political unions, nor held public meetings, how could we have escaped the same extremity? Both these invaluable rights are denied to the French nation. There are no means left open in France by which public dissatisfaction can manifest itself through a peaceable display of moral strength. The press is the only organ of public opinion which exists at all, and the press is weighed down by taxation and persecuted by the law officers of government. Although the June Rebellion of 1832 did not make much of an impact in history, its legacy continues to live on in Les Miserables, thus serving as an important insight into the nature of the economic and social conditions that ultimately resulted in the overall instability of 18th and 19th century France.